All right. Hello, friends. So today is I think the third iteration of this networking abstractions thing. Corey, do you want to give us a quick summary of where we are?
All right. We are about halfway through. Actually, if you go down to the very bottom, there's a link to the last notes from the API review. Could be good to open that up. We have a sort of rough shape API that we're working on there. Last comment.
Last comment? Oh,
Yeah.
I see. It's I was not prepared that it was a link. Which, ironically, I should know because I posted it. All right, so this is round 2. Yep.
Yep. So we basically have the connection class more or less figured out. I think probably the best place to move on to is the ConnectionFactory interface. So if we go back to the other tab, we can take a look at that. If you go down to proposed API, all right.
That is a loud mouthfeel.
Sensitive mic, I guess. Okay, so we have the connection class. Now we need the factory to create it. One sort of issue that I think we have yet to agree on is if this interface should have both connect and bind on it, or if we should split this out into a iConnectionFactory and iConnectionListenerFactory. The benefits of having them together is that if you have, for instance, a SSL factory, then it's pretty obvious. All the functionality is there. It's a little easier to add overloaded methods for. But if you split them out, then you avoid users who, all they want to do is override the kestrel transport. They don't need the connect async because it's used in the server only. So splitting it would let them avoid throwing not implemented exception all over the place. Well,
sorry, Corey. I personally favor combining them. I thought we previously in previous meetings agreed to keep them split. Did we not?
Yeah, we did. That's what I thought too.
Are you sure? I don't see it on notes.
I'm pretty sure we talked through. We talked through. Like my sticking point was whether iConnection would actually be used as like a premier interchange component, whether components would provide an iConnection that could be used client or server without requiring going through the factories, whether any components that use these would not only expose an iConnectionFactory or iConnectionListenerFactory and kind of property, but would also expose sort of something like the set filter we've talked about for sockets HTTP handler, where it could work purely in terms of iConnection. And once we did that, then that does represent the unified client server aspect of this stack, at which point, whether the client, the ConnectionFactory or the ConnectionListenerFactory are the one and the same isn't as big a deal. That's my recollection.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, it's been a few weeks. Apologies if I don't remember everything. I'm kind of going off these notes here.
That's fine. I could be wrong too, but that's what I remembered.
No, yeah.
Yeah, I vaguely recall that. In that case, why don't we take this iConnectionFactory interface and sort of build it out into the two interfaces we want.
The one thing that I did, I also thought we had, and I don't have a high care factor, but I thought we'd also agreed on base classes instead of interfaces for these, unless we saw that it was otherwise would be necessary?
Agreed on base classes for everything except for the ConnectionProperties interface.
Okay.
Right. I had a super spicy idea with it, but it's really bad. It was about, I saw the iCastable object, like
Oh God.
Not saying we should, but man, it is interesting to discuss iProperties. What's it called? ConnectionProperties as iCastable object or whatever. Because you could imagine just casting and getting things to light up, but it feels kind of wrong, and I can't explain.
Oh, I can
Quite
tell you
wrong.
exactly why it feels wrong.
Because it's wrong.
I mean,
you can go back to writing COM if you want, David. We won't stop you.
man, that interface is great.
It's COM sharp.
I could use that in many ways going forward.
Remember the one time where we fucked up our release because of memory leaks?
No, which one was the one time?
Yeah.
I guess if we did that, it would make all of our COM plus environment variables mean something again.
That's true. In fact, that reminds me, I wanted to file a break and change for that. So, where are we with that then?
All right. So are we good with taking the, I guess, the current ConnectionFactory interface, splitting it into a ConnectionFactory and ConnectionFactory listener, Connection Listener Factory classes? One with Connect Async, one with Bind Async as is.
Yep.
And we can assume that we have the Dispose pattern methods in there correctly. Dispose async core and dispose bool.
Where's the is the thing on the screen the current proposal? Didn't we have like emos, gist, or whatever?
We did, but that doesn't have the factory in it, only the connection.
I see.
Yeah, so Emo, do you want to update the gist for that?
So when you say gist, there's
So
no
I do
gist.
remember-
These are the nodes we have. Like I can edit them on my machine. Like that's basically what I'm normally doing.
Okay, cool.
And just to reconfirm, there's pretty much no scenario where you'd end up wanting to reuse the same object as both a listener factory and a factory, right? That just doesn't make sense.
I don't see why it has to be the same object.
No,
It's nice that you
is
can
there
kind of
any
close the
scenario-
loop.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's anyone where you would want to or have to.
Like as a developer, like having both available if it's like some new transport, just so you can connect to, yourself or something. But I don't see why it would need to be the same object.
I was asking purely from a perspective on reusing the same object instance for both, rather than maintainability or something. I was just asking
No.
because of the interface versus base class.
For this level, no, just because
It's
you
an
have
entire
one
listener.
one
effect.
per app. You have it wouldn't be a thing that you'd allocate more than once. I don't think.
Cool.
But so Stefan, we were supposed to look to see if it would be an issue for any of our things, but I think it's fine because we already have interfaces today, so it wouldn't cause any new problems, right?
Right. Like our entire transport abstraction is based on interfaces, so we're not already constrained by needing to implement some base class with our transport.
To that, forward thinking. Oops,
Well,
or not.
I mean, it goes both ways,
Or not.
right? But, yeah.
Sorry, I didn't understand that. Can you elaborate on that? Wouldn't
David's asking.
wouldn't shift moving from interfaces to base classes, wouldn't that actually add a constraint that might be a problem for you? Or you've just proved that
In
it's
the
not a problem?
future, it's just not a problem now because we chose interfaces in the past, so we can keep backwards compatibility with the interfaces.
No,
Dude,
I guess I'm thinking of it from the perspective of Kestrel as a test case for the design of the APIs.
yeah. So Kestrel. So the concern I have is we already have these classes today, and could we add this base class to our current type hierarchy and not break anyone? And I think the answer is yes, because our current abstractions are interfaces. If they were base classes, it would be more problematic and more breaking. But having this be a base class and having our thing be interfaces, the things can work together. Luckily. Does that make sense?
Sorry, I don't know if it was me or you, but I lost you for about 10 seconds there. Could you say it one more time?
Our current implementations implement interfaces. So I was hoping that we could add these abstractions to our current implementations without having to break anything. And it seems doable because we don't have two base classes like colliding.
So today you don't currently use any base class. You
Right.
just implement interface and derive from object. Okay.
Yep. We do have one base class for the connection, but I'm hoping that this can live in the hierarchy as well.
And none of the interfaces we're talking about, you don't implement any two of them on the same object today.
That we implement multiple interfaces on the same object, but not the top level like transport factory and transport. So yeah, not these, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah. For the connection itself, that's where it's more interesting because we do have a base class, but I'm hoping that this fits the type hierarchy. It's
weird. So basically in the connection, we're pushing right now to use an interface with what we're talking about.
Are we? No, it's a base class. For this, right? No, okay. That's gone away, right? There's no connection base and connection.
Only the property bag's the interface.
All right, perfect. Okay, yeah. So we'll have to think more about the connection, like you said.
So then the plan is keep on keeping on. Everything except for the connection bag is base classes until we hear someone scream.
Yep.
Great.
Sounds right. Emo, I pasted a mock of what I think we're currently landing on in the chat.
And in probably an hour or so, we'll have it copied. Man, this is so frustrating. Like, my CPU is 100%, and so, like, everything takes forever.
Time to get one of those new 64-core machines.
Yep, that means I can run Teams and one other Electron app successfully.
You just need a entire machine for Teams like I have. Just a Teams laptop.
Oh, that's sad.
All right. Somebody in chat said Teams can eat 64 cores too.
Your reviews are all on the line now.
What the heck is it? Go back to the main window to see this content. What does that mean?
All right. What are we waiting on right now?
Not on me, hopefully, because I cannot accelerate things here.
Does everyone see the API in the chat that I posted?
No, what I see is go back to the main menu to see this content, and I'm trying to get there.
Likewise.
Interesting.
I have no idea what that even means. Like, what?
Oh.
I mean, iConnection and iConnection Listener in your thing are both connection and connection listener, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So otherwise, it looks sensible to me.
Okay. Emo, it looks like it doesn't show up in the video window, but if you go to the main Teams app and look at it in the chat room, maybe the video window doesn't support code blocks.
Yeah, it says looking for messages. I'm waiting for 20 seconds now for this to actually render the chat window. The funny thing is it's not OBS. OBS uses 8% of my CPU. Oh, God.
So can someone remind me like what the next thing was at the end of the last meeting? Because I think we've gone over basically what we have agreed upon mostly, just trying to get our bearings back.
Yeah, I'm trying to get us to a point of having a gist of what the API looks like, because we've changed it a fair amount.
Yeah, I mean, we made a lot of progress in the last meeting. I just forget what the next thing was.
All right. I don't know how long we're going to wait for Emo, so let's move on for now. Take a look at the connection extensions class with some extension methods on it. It currently has 2 filter methods. Those will need to get blown out into 4, one for the ConnectionFactory class and one for the Connection Listener Factory class.
Why are they extension methods?
They are.
I said why.
Oh. I guess they don't necessarily have to be now that we have actual classes. What do we think about making them actual members on those classes?
Wait,
So assuming they could be extension methods, why would you not want them to be?
Well, the guidance is actually the other way around. Assuming they could be instance methods, why or proper members, why would they be extension members?
Okay, maybe
And
I have the wrong framing of the question apparently.
I mean, it makes sense though, right? Because if you use extension methods, you have the least amount of flexibility, right? Like extension methods make usually sense for things where you can't add instance methods, like interfaces, or if you, for whatever reason, have a layering problem where you have to move it up one level. But instance members should be the default because, you know, it doesn't require a new type. It, you know, has access to all the state that you can possibly want to have access to.
That makes a lot of sense.
where's the method? I can't see anything. Should I be on YouTube?
So I disabled sharing in the hope that it removes some of the CPU load, and as you can imagine, it does nothing for that. Like it's still 100%, so I have no idea what's eating my CPU right now.
So what are we staring at? Like a link in the chat? Is that
Yeah,
what we're
it's
doing?
the
I see.
thing that I
Yeah, if
still
you-
can't open.
Go to the issue 1793. We're on the connection extensions class.
It's about 23% of the way down.
Corey, could you share your screen in?
Overly precise number sounds smart.
That would be nice, yeah. Do that.
What do we want?
Could you share your screen just to make it easier for everyone to follow along with you?
Yeah, that's probably best at this point.
Well, Emo, are you still sharing the browser to YouTube?
I do.
So anyone sharing the YouTube back means we'd be at least consistent. We'd be looking at the same thing everybody else is looking at.
I mean, the YouTube one is probably also not the right one, right? Like that's.
Okay.
I don't know
Yeah,
what
go ahead and share
Corey
for
is showing. I'll try to figure it out on my end.
Okay, let me share in that case. All right, can everyone see?
Yep.
Okay, so we are talking about this class here, the connection extensions. These two filter methods, these don't need any sort of private access to the class. It would just be a standard functionality that wraps. But they can be, I think they can be member methods on top of ConnectionFactory and ConnectionListenerFactory. One thing I don't love about them is it kind of has the same issue that like concat has on enumerable and string, and that it's may not be obvious that it returns a new object. It doesn't update the current instance.
So then maybe it wants to be a static non-extension method on the types themselves.
So people would type ConnectionFactory.filter.
Yeah, so ConnectionFactory backed equal ConnectionFactory dot filter of stuff.
Yeah, I think that could help that. Okay.
The other thing we briefly touched on last time was, I believe the two overloads here, I couldn't see the right-hand side, but one of them is for returning stream and one of them is for returning iConnection.
Yes.
So I think we talked about adding one for completeness for pipe.
Ah, true. So we're going to have 6 of these methods. Oh, boy.
I mean, we don't have to if we don't think it would be useful, but it seems a little strange to prioritize one half of the interface.
Yeah, I agree. It makes sense.
Sorry, I'm still not trying to show like what exactly are you looking at, because the one that you posted in chat doesn't have 6 methods, right?
The one I posted in chat was for this interface here.
Yeah.
But we were waiting for you to catch up, so I moved on for a second.
Oh, I see. Okay. So I'm just sharing your screen right now on YouTube. So like basically whatever you present is the one that. But I was looking at it too, but I just didn't know how that was related to what you posted in chat.
Sure.
But that makes sense.
So let me go to the comment down here. Oh my God! Without wide GitHub, this is terrible. I appreciate the pain you go through, Emo.
That's why I usually edit with code and then paste it over, because it's unbearable.
Yeah. Okay. So
now you know why I chop so much.
This is what this would look like now. These filter methods.
Gotcha.
As well as what the split connection factory and connection listen factory look like. So one has connect, one has bind, the standard dispose stuff on them.
So why the verb filter? What is being filtered here?
The basic problem is if all you want to do is inject a really simple, take the current byte stream, I want to filter it, give you a new byte stream. There's a whole lot of ceremony. So these filter methods, all they do is they take a current connection, the properties that it was opened with, and cancellation token, and you can just say, based on this connection, I want you to use this stream. And this implements all of these classes for you.
So what are you typically doing? Because, I mean, it seems like a func with 3 arguments is a bit of a mouthful. 4 arguments, never mind.
I mean, do you think a full delegate, a new delegate would be clearer, or is it just
I'm actually
based on the
thinking of like an actual type that you just override methods for example. Like, I mean, basically what I'm asking is this the right abstraction? Because it seems like this is seems a bit plumby for my taste. And it's like when you already have a func with like 3 arguments, like, eventually you will have 4, 5, 6, and then it becomes a little bit of a cluster. Versus if you have it like a type or whatever, like, we can add more properties to it, for example.
So you're thinking maybe a filtering connection factory that
you can either do one thing where you can just take some of the arguments you pass to the func and just make them a context struct, for example, right? That we can just add more shit to. Then at least the func signature is not quite as bad. Another option is to just literally have an abstraction with a virtual that you override, that you pass to the filter method. Like, people, I mean, like with link, for example, like it would suck tremendously if there would be types you have to derive from, right? Like having methods there makes sense, right? Because you usually have a one-line implementation. But will these things ever have a one-line implementation, or will you write like, a page of code in there? Because then a lender is probably also not the best way to do it.
Yeah, maybe David has some more insight if he's seen things like this. But you're going to have to implement a stream or a pipe yourself already. So this maybe isn't saving you a ton of code unless you have maybe like a gzip stream that you can just quickly instantiate inside of this callback.
Yeah, also, I'm unsure. Like, what you described sounds to me like more like a transform, not like a filter. Like, filter to me implies like there's a predicate somewhere.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, transform I think works fine.
Yeah, sure. Strong opinions, weakly held kind of thing. I'm like, sure.
Yeah, I don't.
I mean, I'm just asking, like, if that is the canonical networking terminology, I'm fine with that. It just seems odd to me. Like, to me, a filter is something that removes stuff. It doesn't necessarily mean that you transform input to another form.
Yeah, I think that's a fair understanding. I don't think either one necessarily has a stronger hold in network terminology.
I mean, that's why we used to call our thing connection filters, and we ended up calling it like connection middleware. I mean, I kind of agree on the semantics of filter being a little bit different. Quick technical question. What iConnection properties is being passed into the filter? Like, where's that coming from again?
So it's this guy right here.
Okay, it's the connect async. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. So you call connect async. It will use your base factory to call connect, and then it will call your callback based on the connection it gets from the base factory.
Do you have an example anywhere of something calling filter?
That's a good question. I'm actually not sure if I wrote that here.
Like,
nope.
A func with like 3 arguments doesn't scare me a ton, but it is a little annoying that things like connection properties don't have a name, so it's not like necessarily obvious that it's like connect options or whatever.
Yeah, that's the other problem with functs, is that everything is numbered arguments.
Mhm.
I mean,
all
in
the
fairness,
func hit.
in fairness, you name it, right? But like, you have to kind of know what it is.
So essentially, it looks like this.
Yeah, if most of them look like this, then a func makes sense to me, right? If they all just become one-liners.
Yeah,
The
I mean,
other
if
thing-
you have a custom stream, then there's a lot more than one line, but this is kind of the intention to make sort of that one-line composability format work well.
Another
Sure.
thing with the func, right, is like if you're going with a filter, as we're calling it right now, connection properties is effectively read-only. So if you like string multiple filters together, one filter, as far as I could tell, wouldn't be able to modify the properties seen by the next.
Correct.
Now the connections properties itself, it could wrap. Well, no, not for the stream wrappers. Sorry, never mind. Not even that.
Yeah, is that
so
a
this-
good or is that a bad thing?
I think it's
mean,
fine.
It's not really intended for like I need to override every aspect of this API, because in that case you would just implement the classes. This is just really to save you a whole lot of boilerplate if all you want to do is wrap a stream.
Yeah, I was just asking to make sure I understood it correctly, but I don't think that's like a major shortcoming.
So I still don't understand, like, what is the semantics of calling filter? Like, what did you do? Like, what did this one line that you just wrote, what does it actually accommodate, provide you with?
So this one-liner creates a connection factory that wraps another connection factory. So it calls the base, and then it just wraps the stream from the base with a new stream. Essentially, you're getting all of this implemented, as well as the connection class in a one-liner instead of overloading tons of methods.
I see.
So essentially, Emo, you were proposing earlier, like what it looked like a derived class, or like with a class rather than a method. So the class Corey just described, of you instead of writing connection factory dot filter with a delegate, you would write new filtered connection factory, and that's basically the implementation we'd have under the covers.
Right. Yeah, so it basically just affects the stream that you would
Yeah,
have.
all it does is it calls factory.connectAsync, and then it calls the delegate here by doing connection.stream, and it returns an all new connection with the stream filtered on it.
So the thing you're showing on the screen, like, where is this code?
Where is what?
Like the code that you're showing on the screen, is that in the description, or where do I find this?
Oh, this is
Sorry. Okay, never
in the
mind.
comment.
Because I was trying to scroll to the right hand side to like what other, like, you have connection properties, and then what else do you pass in? So basically, you have one for stream, one for duplex pipe, and one for connection. So what does the last one do then?
Well, this is what you would return if you did want to change some connection properties on the return. So these are very basic, just filter my stream for me, and this is I want to do a little more.
What do you do when you want to do more of them? You just chain them then?
So for example, yeah, like in Kestrel, if you have some like filter that's doing like a TLS handshake, you might want to let code that runs after like inspect what algorithm was used or what like version of TLS or something, and you might throw that in connection properties.
Right. Yeah, I guess my question is like, what happens if you want to handle all three cases? Then you just chain them together, but then how do you share state without crazy
But
captures.
the stream and the, I assume the stream and the pipe versions are just creating a new connection where the stream is the stream and the pipe is the pipe wrapper, or if you do the pipe, then the stream is the stream
Exactly.
wrapper for the pipe. And if you do the connection one, then now you own the whole connection. You get to do whatever you want. So it's the two easy cases and then the hard case.
Yeah. So
I see. So but you're saying basically they're mutually exclusive. Like you only do one of them, you don't do all three of them or two of them.
yeah, there would never be a case where you did all three.
Okay.
So is
In
filter
either
really just
case-
compose?
It's a composition. It's like add middleware in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I agree
All
that
I do
filter
is
sounds like
transforming
something's
events.
being removed.
Yeah.
But this is just wrapping, like it's wrapper compose instead of filter, because you're maybe taking stuff away, you're maybe adding stuff on, you're just putting a thing around the other thing. So
It's
what we
really
call
like
with methods.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's allowing you to compose based on stream instead of based on the full connection factory. So yeah, it's just for composition here.
Are we going to use this anywhere in Sockets HTTP handler or in Kestrel?
We do use. I was at one point using this in our implementation. I can't recall if I still am.
The shortcut version, probably not.
Well,
exactly.
we have some other APIs here. Let's see.
Other people could use the
My,
shortcut version.
my comment
But
is
for our-
my comment is the obvious comment, which is if we're not going to use it and we can't find in use for it with all of our uses in either Kestrel or Sockets HTTP handler, and we're having a hard time describing it and figuring out how it should look and be used, maybe we punt until we get more data.
Yeah, I think we could reasonably do that if we want to start off a little conservative here.
What's the alternative like API that you use?
The
How much code do
alternative
you have to
is
write?
to implement all these classes yourself.
which is like what we would do for HBS and all that, but
Which
It would
is, it's a lot of work, but
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, like it's a lot of work, and if we do expect there to be these one-liners, and we really think that's going to happen, then we should absolutely do it. The question is, for real use cases, is there just enough more complexity that you need to derive from these types yourself anyway? At which point, is it just slideware, demoware for a conference rather than something that's actually useful? That's my question.
Do we have the filter methods on the connection itself? Do we have that too, or do we just only have the factories?
only on the factory.
for the connection itself, it's easy-ish to just copy the properties and then or not copy. You get what I'm saying? Forward the property.
Yeah, forward. Yeah, I mean it's less
Yeah.
it's less code for sure.
And then use like the stream to pipe or pipe to stream wrapper. But you're right.
I'm not super convinced of this wrapper yet.
Well, why don't we leave it off?
Yeah.
We can add it on later.
Yep.
I mean, my bigger concern is unless we understand the flow, I think having normal virtual behavior where you override makes more sense because it composes nicer, right? Like this callback mechanism basically means we have to make sure that everything that might be relevant you actually pass in, right? And then if you ever add to that state set, then you basically have to add another overload that takes a different shape of the func, versus if it's just you derive from ConnectionFactory, you wrap another ConnectionFactory, you override the methods you want to override, then it's pretty straightforward to add more stuff to that, right? And that's why I would generally say if you try to compose stuff and you wrap stuff, unless you have a super simple base interface like IEnumerable, I think these extension methods or logical extension methods will eventually not work anymore. So yeah, I'd be in favor of not doing that. I think the technical term for this was there's too much viscosity or something like that. The API shape is too viscous.
All right, so we're just cutting filter.
Yep.
And then remind me again, how do I get to a factory to begin with?
New.
Okay, so we ship a default one then?
Well, there would be somewhere in the world there will be the TLS, unless we still have to call it SSL Connection Factory. Somewhere in the world there will be the TCP Connection Factory.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, like Kestrel will definitely ship with one if it's not like exactly what's in the BCL, which it very well could be. But yeah.
And so you literally have to instantiate them every time. You don't have like a static thingy for that.
No, you can instantiate one configured how you want it and use that.
Sorry,
It's
guys.
funny
I had
that-
an important phone call. I'm back.
I mean, that would really be up to whatever any of the individual factory types are, right? Like if TCP doesn't need any data, then maybe there's just, TCP connection factory dot instance, and it's all TCPs just differ based on what you pass into bind. And if that's the case, then huzzah, and if not, then they're not.
In other words, there's no one connection factory or one connection listener factory to rule them all.
Yeah.
Yet.
That already means it's probably hard to use because people will have a hard time finding the thing that actually does the thing that makes the thing happen.
I mean, it seems like essentially this is stream, right? It's at this point we say stuff does stuff, and now somebody needs to make that mean something, which is a derived type.
Totally.
Stream.
But stream is also a good example where we, until we had file.blah, people couldn't figure out how to do it, right?
Sure, cuts both ways.
But yeah.
All right. Have we landed anywhere on the filter methods? Taking them out?
Yeah, I think we
We're-
said take them out until there's a non-demoware scenario for that.
Less is more.
I can get behind that.
All right. Let's see. Connection listener class here looks okay to everyone. Similar pattern. You call accept with some options. It returns a connection.
What's the difference between the connection and the listener? The listener is the thing on the other side?
Yeah, so the listener is something you would repeatedly call accept async to accept connections on the server.
So the server basically creates a connection listener factory, creates a connection listener, and then effectively has this global accept loop.
Yep.
I do have a question about stopping the listener. When I call Dispose, if there's like an ongoing call to accept async, what happens for one? Does it like throw, return null, something like that? And then two, is there a way that I can tell the listener to like abort all connections? Or are we leaving that up to kind of the user of the listener to handle themselves, because they obviously could just take the I connections and abort them? I'm kind of actually leaning towards the latter on the last part, but just
Yeah, I don't know if it would be appropriate for the listener to like own the connections and dispose all the ones that it's ever created.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what Dispose should do, if it should cancel a pending accept, or if we should ask people to use the cancellation token. I think that for our own types, we could use that very easily, but anyone implementing this, it can be kind of a pain to implement cancellation logic in two places.
I have a thought. I have two thoughts.
Sure.
One isn't useful. One is probably more useful. Accept async versus async enumerable. What are the thoughts on that? That clearly describe it clearly describes like the end of a stream. You could just for each over the accept loop basically, and there's a way to cancel, a way to end it. It's very well. I think it's clear. That's one thing. I mean, it's new, so it's different. so I know how it feels. It feels tough, but
Just to clarify, was that the useful or the not useful question?
that was the not useful.
Okay.
But worth talking about one. The other one is Dispose should absolutely accept yield. If it's not,
Well,
it's
at the very least,
a bit of a
or
troll.
something, right?
Yeah, so yield in some form. Either throw or return null or something.
I mean, that seems desirable. I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that seems more like a feature to help the user from doing something wrong, maybe. So why wouldn't you want to use the cancellation token?
Because it requires an allocation every time you call accept. That's why.
Okay. Stephen, we need a value cancellation token registration.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
It's a good excuse.
You need a non-allocated registration for cancellation tokens.
No, it's better now. It's not as bad as it was before. But I do. I am worried about that. Like today, I don't think accept even takes a token in sockets. Like it doesn't take one at all. So would we make that work?
Yeah.
Because today, like
it just hasn't been plumbed, is all. We can support it.
Wait, let me ask a different question.
There isn't even API.
So what is the cases where you want to cancel the accept when you're not disposing?
Yeah, yeah.
Because it seems like you will accept forever unless you want to stop the server, right? In which case you dispose the listener.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. I can think of reasons to slow down accept, but I can't think of a reason to completely cancel an ongoing one, aside from shutdown at the moment.
In that case, do we get rid of the cancellation token completely and say dispose is the first class way to stop an accept loop?
I'm hesitant to remove the cancellation token completely, even though I just said I can't come up with a great scenario other than shutdown. But it's an interesting point.
Because it doesn't really make sense for accept to have a timeout, does it? Or does it?
I don't think so.
No, it doesn't. I would love for us to not have to implement cancellation logic in two places.
While I agree, Dispose has to make it yield. That just seems like broken if it doesn't.
I would almost be more.
Go ahead, Seven.
Yeah, I would be more okay with like removing the cancellation token and have Dispose async work than the alternative, which is to have only the cancellation token work. I don't know. I don't. I guess adding an overload later if you're wrong isn't that crazy, except for it wouldn't work on old implementations. That's the problem.
Or make it be Async enumerable, and then all the questions are answered.
Well, not really, right? Because now you have.
Other than how to use it.
You still have the same problem with async enumerable, right?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, you can't call dispose async on the async enumerable while move next async is in flight.
That's illegal?
Yeah.
Oh man. I mean, it's illegal because we made it illegal. We could make it illegal
because there's no way to do that well with the state machines in C#, with the iterators in C#.
That does suck. So Dispose is for after, not for during. You can't cancel the Dispose.
Right. Any one operation in flight at a time.
Yep.
So what happens when you call it? It's just undefined behavior, or?
Undefined, probably race conditions and bad things.
I think
bad things could include two concurrent threads running through the same iterator at the same time.
Interesting.
It's fun. Yeah, I think I'm sold on not necessarily needing to cancel individual accepts. My opinion would be just leave off the cancellation token in that case.
The only thing I don't like about it is if we're wrong, it's not something we could like easily add to the base class and make like existing implementations work.
I mean, you kind of can. I mean, like that's the problem that we have in the BCL all the time, right? The way you would do it is you would make accept async the existing one. You would move it from abstract to virtual, and you would make it call the other one, and then the new one is virtual. So that the only downside is if you now derive from it, by default you don't know which one to override. But
well, and the problem is the existing implementations. The new virtual function would be calling the existing accept async that doesn't take a cancellation token, right? So, like, what happens?
That's generally how it's done. The existing one stays abstract. You add a new virtual one that takes cancellation token. It just drops the cancellation token and delegates to the existing one, and then a derived class effectively needs to override both and reverse it.
Yep. Right. Yeah, meaning anything made before the API change just doesn't look at the cancellation token, which because how could it?
Yep.
But that's kind of the best you can do. Right? That's not even a function of the API share, right? That's just
right. That's just the decision we're making. Is like what I'm saying is there's just no easy escape hatch where everything just continues to work.
But also in practice, how many people derive from this, right? We probably ship a bunch of stuff that's in box, so if we fix our own, that probably still means in practice 90% of code will work just fine.
Yeah, for what it's worth, the guideline that we wrote down is do accept a cancellation parameter, and we don't talk about any situation where it's acceptable to not take one.
Yeah, I'm definitely leaning towards taking it.
So
like
we can all take it and simply ignore it, which is wrong, but that when at least you can recover from easier than the other direction.
In my opinion, the least evil is to accept two ways of canceling accept async.
Yep.
Like you said, there aren't that many implementations we can do it. Like, and we can optimize for when like cancellation token none's passed in and
and presumably, we'd have a fast path like we always do for no cancellation token provided, default provided, and presumably Kestrel could just choose to not pass one in. Right?
Yep.
Okay.
Cool.
Can do that.
But I agree, Dispose then would, absolutely needs to tear stuff down, just like it does on Socket today.
Yep.
All right.
Awesome.
So this API is done for connection listener.
David, what were you asking?
No, I think durable.
No.
Well, one more time.
Stop it.
Can we add a comment?
I'm not entirely sure. Oh, what is the benefit you see there?
I'm mostly wondering for these kinds of APIs where you call it over and over in a loop, where you're returning what is essentially an infinite stream of things. Why wouldn't we do async enumerable? I'm mostly testing the waters. I mean,
do you really want to know what happens if somebody says accept async paren.count? Like,
I mean,
like, welcome to the least defined thing ever.
I mean, we're gonna be looking at other APIs that have similar infinite streams, and that will be a concern in general. So it'll be good to understand the concern, just so I have a feel for what we want to do in the future.
To me, the argument would go like this. I would say it seems a bit contrived to say this is a stream of connections, right? I mean, you can, but like there's more concerns around that, and you probably want more control, as we said with Dispose, for example. Do you want to be able to tear down the whole thing or not? Like, also, what kind of verbiage do you want to have? I mean, accept async probably makes more sense than, get all connections async or something like that, right? So you could probably model it as an async enumerable, but it seems a bit either cutesy or just almost the wrong vocabulary for the job, right?
For consumers of this, is it always going to be the case that you choose to have n processing loops, no more, no less? Like if that's the situation, then you're going to spin up n async loops sitting in a for each and then wait for each, and then maybe it makes sense. But if you ever kind of move that up or down, or there's something where you want to temporarily have an extra accept or one fewer accepts, that kind of breaks the abstraction.
Yep.
And I'm actually asking the question. I don't know the answer.
I think so. For the most common use case, is basically a long-lived loop, while true accept in a loop.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fixed number in Kestrel right now based on number of cores or something.
Yep.
I haven't seen anything dynamically change the number of loops, so we don't, but seems possible. I don't see why we'd want to do something that prevents that.
Yeah, I mean, from a perf perspective, the downside, if it's not long-lived, is more overhead for each one, because you have the overhead of the async enumerable, and multiple interface calls and the extra object and blah 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 blah. But if every time you're getting back a brand new connection, it's probably dwarfed.
Yeah.
The upside is a slightly easier consumption model, assuming people understand sort of the model you're going for, the await for each loop. And maybe there's a perf benefit, depending on how it's implemented, on the teardown side of things, because if it's as written here, where it's value task iConnection rather than value task iConnection question mark, the only way of communicating you didn't get something back is an exception.
Right.
And so on teardown side, it's exceptional.
Right. Yeah. So I think like returning null for knowing its ending always felt weird to me, and I always wondered, like, should this instead just be a long live for each loop, where the loop ending is kind of like the signal that the sequence is over. But
so in Kestrel today, is it nullable? The result?
Yeah, it's nullable. Yep. Okay, awesome. Good discussion.
Where did you land?
Oh no! So we aren't doing it now, and we have a bunch of data about why potentially it would be better or worse to not do it.
Okay.
For future reference.
We could always build it as
on top,
extension on top of this.
Yep.
I mean, the only benefit really with async enumerable is that you can support these programming models, right? Where somebody has an RX-based situation, right? Where you want to compose these things in a nicer way with link extension methods or stuff. But for connections, it also seems somewhat far-fetched, right? Like for the actual messages, maybe, but for the connections, that seems a bit, I don't know.
Connection throttling is a scenario. You could use RX for it. I don't know if that's a reason to switch to IEnumerable though, or async enumerable. But it's not unheard of to want to throttle incoming connections.
Yeah, that's actually a thing you want to do.
But would that give you the right level? I mean, if you write 100 lines of code and then you can just express it as a 1-line hookup versus a 4-line hookup, does that make the difference, right? That's the thing I'm generally not. I think to me, RX makes sense when you have a library with building blocks that do all these things for you, right? So the people basically only have to write 1 line of code, right, to wire things together. And I'm not sure that necessarily holds for connections themselves.
I think it might. I do wonder if RX has a throttling API for async enumerable today. It might have something.
Well, I'm sure they do.
Exists.
Yeah. But it can always be added on top. So I'm not pushing. I want to understand basically what the thoughts were in the room. So that's good.
Okay. Moving on, the last part of these extension classes is an extension to just based on try get of T on a connection properties.
T value. Ship it.
Yeah. Everyone okay with that?
Yeah. With the T value, you mean?
You just want to change T to T value?
It's fine.
That's fine.
Why, though? Sorry, I'm just curious.
It's a value, isn't it?
Well, T is the key and the value, so it's kind of both.
Oh, I guess it is key and okay.
T it is.
T is fine then. T thing.
All right. So I think that's the main API. I think we got through it all.
So can I, on that note, can we, if we're all cool with that, can we unblock Corey getting the PR for that put up, for that portion?
What would that mean to unblock him?
Well, just get a PR for this new assembly, and
yeah, we've been sitting on. He's been sitting on local changes for like a month now, and I would love to, I'd love for us to get through the rest of this in the next 15 minutes, but I don't know that we will. And it'd be great to unblock him, making forward progress.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking. Like, what would we have to do to unblock him? Like, is there an API we need to review? Is there some code changes we need to review?
It's this API. So we just completed reviewing like the main. These are the interfaces. We haven't reviewed the implementation yet, but we can get all these interfaces or classes now, and their assembly and that sort of thing pushed into a PR.
And he can get it all hooked up into Sockets HTTP handler. Basically, we have one issue that represents a whole bunch of stuff. I'm saying we've completed a portion of it. He should be able to make forward progress on that. And I'm just double checking everyone's cool with that.
Well, the Sockets handler stuff requires this API too. So
no, it does not. I mean, someone doesn't need that, right? They can, if that's necessary for the Sockets HTTP handler implementation. There's the public property. Sure. Okay.
Yeah. So we could put all these base classes here, but there would be no implementation of them yet.
Okay. Let's start on the publicly exposed properties.
Yeah. I guess just as a quick logistical understanding question on that. So these new types are going to be in a new package. Yes.
Yes.
Wait.
Yes.
They're going to be part of. They're going to be part of the BCL. They have to be because HTTP client uses them.
I mean, it'd be both. It's both, right? It needs to be in NetStandard 2.02.
Does it?
Yeah.
Why?
Why?
Because it's used in the Signar client, which runs everywhere.
Okay.
So that's another thing that I wanted to bring.
What's the package layering between the thing that will do OpenTCP and the thing that is these base classes? Are they all in one package? Are we extending the systemnet sockets to have the socket stuff but not the connection stuff? Like, what are the big building blocks? What are the big Legos? What are the Duplos here?
Yeah, I mean, I could see this living in one assembly as easy as I could see it living in multiple assemblies. I suppose for layering, the base classes should be in their own assembly, and then we can have an implementation inside of sockets and security and HTTP client.
Yep.
Okay, so all the things that have the existing model, the new things are going to be siblings in the same assembly, which makes sense. And then this is either
these additional APIs will be in other assemblies.
Okay. Is systemnet primitives right for this, or does it have to be net new?
I mean, it's kind of a primitive, but at the same time, not.
Okay. I mean, we may have also stopped shipping systemnet primitives when we built the shared framework. So,
well, the layering here is kind of weird because we pipelines has to be layered right next to this guy. So if pipelines is on I'm not sure if that has a dependency on systemnet at all.
What is pipelines? No.
No.
Nope.
Okay. Well, I mean, this isn't so much API work. Can we figure that out outside of this meeting?
Sort of. And
I'm just trying to reason about.
I mean, so the one thing that I wanted to bring up is that we haven't generally looked at layering recently. So we have approved a bunch of APIs, like the CBOR stuff, for example, and Eric asked me also where this stuff should go. We should definitely look at like the assemblies where new stuff goes, because we shouldn't just default to adding new assemblies, because that has other costs that we also need to keep in mind. And so it seems from what you're saying is that there's some inbox dependencies in Netcore app, the shared framework, they will need access to those APIs. So it has to be in there somewhere. Now we haven't, and then there's probably some things like the concrete implementations clearly live higher than sockets because it depends on sockets. And then there's the primitives, which might be lower than that or at the same level, depending on where we want to move this, right? But so we just need to find an inbox assembly that fits the bill. And if there is none, we can create one. But I would generally recommend let's not assume there's a new one, because to me, ubing is a separate issue that we can solve independently of this. We should just put this at the right layer in the platform where it belongs. And ideally, it would be an existing assembly. because we already
Yeah,
have too
so-
many of them. Like that's
System net primitives. Oh wait, that's type forward.
Well, system net primitives doesn't necessarily make sense because then you would have that primitives assembly depending on pipelines, which
Right.
I don't know if that's appropriate.
That's fine.
yeah.
So,
yeah, I mean, it would be so. That's something that it kind of belongs here. I mean, that doesn't necessarily be solved today, but it would be good to basically think about: do you have one block that layering wise, or is it like basically 3 blocks like this, the abstractions, and then one for each implementation, TCP and sockets.
yeah, if it helps my prototype, I did put the base classes in their own assembly and all the other ones either in the sockets assembly or the system net security assembly. So that's how I had to split up there.
Yeah, the downside with that is that you basically add another set of an assembly that everybody has to reference, right? That's the unfortunate thing.
Yep. All right. Let's see. Steven, you wanted to look at the sockets handler ones. Okay, so
yeah, so we're going to look at things in the order of unblocking progress.
Yep, good idea. Okay, so sockets HTTP handler. We're going to add a couple ways for people to inject their own ConnectionFactory into this. Sort of the base for that is this set ConnectionFactory here. There's no way, or you can get the default factories here and sort of wrap them in whatever way you want, or you can just implement them all from scratch and just call this set ConnectionFactory. There is also basically a way to add a stream filter in front of encryption so you can get access to the unencrypted bytes. So there's this set connection filter here, which looks very similar to the other filter methods of you get some stuff and you return a stream or a connection. Does that make sense?
That's a lot of methods.
Yep.
So are we gonna have the conversation about filter as a name again? I thought we avoided it by just removing the APIs. But
It might remove all.
Here we are.
Remove all the APIs. I'm
This one
wondering.
specifically is a filter method that has been requested, so I don't think we'd want to remove this one.
Okay, it actually is a filter. Is it? Or
It's
is it
a
like
transform.
It's a
It
thing
really
that
is.
lives in between the things.
Right.
It goes in the middle of other wares somehow.
David,
Right.
we can't use the
Yeah,
M.
there needs to be something here. I don't care if it's called filter or transform, but
Yeah.
this is required.
Obviously, what they want is T, but that only makes sense
Just to
if you
be
worked
clear,
on
the other one we talked about, like you can do it on your own. You can't do this one on your own.
Right.
Yeah, so we would have to add some prototyping. I did have a way to do this in a way that's like a little more idiomatic to the ConnectionFactory stuff, but we think the majority use case people will just want to call a quick filter method here.
Well, I also want to point out, like when I was talking earlier and in previous meetings, like the sticking point for me about having one thing that ends up being like the preeminent piece of this whole design that's shared across client and server, like that is, and how every component that deals, deals with iConnections needs to expose something at that level. That is this.
Yep. I feel like there are too many methods here. Do they all have
let me
unique
explain
use
what they all
cases?
do.
Yeah.
It's kind of making things a little easier, but then letting you customize more and more. So this is basically just returning a basic TCP ConnectionFactory, whatever sockets handler uses already.
Right.
This one here lets you just create the socket, but otherwise behaves the same. So if you want to set like TCP keep alive flag on the socket, you can do that.
And to be clear, the top 4 are all overloads of this method.
Yeah. And then these two are, again, sort of shortcuts if all you want to do is return a stream instead of implementing all of the base classes yourself.
And specifically, those are about people wanting to change the transport used by the HTTP client.
Right.
Yes.
Or the socket handler, like name pipe or something else.
Correct.
Yep.
So the top one is basically you want to configure the socket and that's it. The next one is you want to go above that and configure the whole connection or give back the connection in one way, shape, or form. You own everything.
Mm-hmm.
I see. So these map to the virtuals on the socket factory, basically. Some of them,
Essentially, yeah.
So what I'm missing is, like Steven just said, like you can't do the functionality without actually having these methods. But why wouldn't you be able to just wrap the ConnectionFactory?
The bottom ones, the bottom methods in particular, they get applied around the encryption layer or underneath the encryption layer that HTTP handler provides. So there's literally no way right now for someone to plug in at that level.
I see. So but the top four are effectively just shorthands for you wrapping an ConnectionFactory yourself.
Yeah, those are shorthands for this method here of just saying here's the ConnectionFactory. But these are more shortcuts for take the default ConnectionFactory and just change it in one specific way. So one changes just the socket, the other one overrides the stream.
These were born out of the 7 or 8 use cases that we have and trying to come up with the simplest way someone could implement them.
So, okay, so the top ones I get because they're static, but then what does the non-static ones mean? So I create a socket HTTP handler and then I call set ConnectionFactory. What does that do?
So forget the top 6 for a moment.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The entry point into socket's HTTP handler to actually configure what ConnectionFactory it uses, regardless of where it came from, how it was created, who built it. That is the entry point, set ConnectionFactory. That basically says socket's HTTP handler, use this.
Yep.
So who's creating the socket's HTTP handler then? That's the customer's code, right? Okay.
Yeah, the user is doing that up, and they're calling set ConnectionFactory.
And then what? Because I mean, like this thing doesn't have anything else.
So today, Emo, you say new socket's HTTP handler, and it's doing its own internal establishing of connections and whatnot, right? When you set ConnectionFactory, it goes to that. Whatever ConnectionFactory was provided, it uses that to get its connections.
Okay, so I think I understand. So socket HTTP handler is an existing type, right? And that's already what you pass into the HTTP handler that goes over sockets, right? And then you basically just do whatever you do today, and then the only thing you do differently is you call set ConnectionFactory to make it go over this thing, right?
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, okay, now it makes more sense.
The bottom 3 methods need to be instance on socket's HTTP handler. The ones above that can live anywhere.
Yeah, and similar to the questions we had with filter and the complex func here, is the expectation that most things can do this in one line, or would it make more sense for there to be a custom type? And I think there is a custom type, which is just ConnectionFactory, and at which point, I guess, sorry, it's not ConnectionFactory because you need the current handshake of create socket. So like, should there be a rich type with an abstract that you're supposed to implement that makes it easier to understand how to version it?
So from my expectation, and Corey and David can chime in, this whole feature set is born out of the idea that those would be one-liners, because there's going to be someone publishes a package, us or someone else, with a logging connection, and it just logs everything that it wraps another connection, and it just logs everything that comes across it. And so this one-liner is arrow new logging connection.
Yeah, I agree. And to kind of restate that, like, it's because iConnection is the shared abstraction between server and client. So you're going to have these iConnection wrappers, but they're not going to have like necessarily a consistent way to hook up to, say, like Kestrel and Socket's HTTP handler. But as long as you have the wrapper and like a one-liner to add it, like these filter methods, I think we're in good shape.
But this isn't using it's using ConnectionFactory, but this is given a request message, an endpoint, and some connection properties, go connect to something. So like, I mean, maybe this would be it's
given the iConnection.
The last one is a filter. The one at the very top are factories, right?
Right.
Yeah, so
But-
these are
Sorry,
filters.
sorry,
It says like here is
I'm talking
my
about the factories. Maybe that was unclear.
You're talking about
Okay.
the top.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm asking, do we need those factories?
We need something to make it simpler.
Do we need the three things that take funcs? Or
We need-
should
we
it
need
be one
something-
thing that has an abstract method?
There needs to be something like the scenarios that are driving this. The whole reason this is wrapped up with socket HTTP handler is because like we have had outstanding requests for years
Yep.
that we've punted to basically this issue, and each of them end up being 1 or 2 liners because of the top 4 or the top 6 methods. If you remove those, it becomes, you can still do everything, but it becomes a whole lot of work right fast.
I guess what I'm confused by is like, it seems like for sockets HTTP handler, there's one connection factory that represents the thing that goes over sockets, right? Why wouldn't that just be a public type I can directly instantiate?
So we kind of started out looking at that. That's how it was prototyped initially. I think the goal here is that almost all of the use cases we have for this entire API set right now are focused on HTTP client, and we wanted to make those asks very trivial without having to implement all of these APIs. So someone just wanted to add a pre-connection filter. So they can do that here. We could have built it another way where they compose factories and it figures stuff out. But this makes it an easy one-liner. Similarly, we've had requests to set some socket options, but everything else is identical. They don't want to change anything else, and this enables to do that with a one-liner.
I think to maybe if I understood Emo's question. Emo, is your question, could you do something different instead of the top 6 methods?
Yeah, I guess my concern is, so like it seems like some of this stuff in the top 6 methods is not really specific to sockets, right? That's just anything that goes over a connection factory will have a way to create the actual thing that does the work, right? And then you have additional things you want to do with that, right? And those additional things are probably generic things that we could do over any iConnection factory, right? And so this was I think the original extension methods, like the filter methods that we decided to punt. Because in that world,
But
you would
can, but you need to start. You need to know, like, the implementation here will end up fishing out of the connection properties, like the HTTP request message and the DNS endpoint, all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of boilerplate specific to this consumer.
Yep.
So unless we want everyone using these to write all that boilerplate, and I don't think we do, because there are 7 or 8 kind of common examples where this is going to become a primary thing.
So, because it seems like if you're using this for, I want to do custom proxy routing, because maybe I'm not doing a TCP-based proxy, maybe I'm doing a named pipe proxy or whatever. That's not a one-liner. That's
so
to write
key example, like Jeremy, like for the second method there, the one that returns a socket. Like we get requests over and over and over for, I want to do everything that Sockets HTTP handler currently does, but I want to restrict it to a certain network interface, which means I want to create the socket, call bind, and return the socket. It's the only thing I want to change. So it's that second method with a func that says new socket, socket.bind, return socket. So it's a 3-liner.
Yeah, all of these are just to make things easier for the HTTP client users. Like,
my question isn't, do you not need composition? It's, instead of having 3 things with disparate funcs, should there be a create connection factory of HTTP sockets resolver? Like, do you want?
I mean, the alternative design, I think, instead of the top 6 method, 6 or 4 overloads and 2 methods, is a concrete sockets HTTP handler connection factory type with like 3 virtuals, or 4 virtuals, whatever it ends up being. And you say new sockets HTTP handler connection factory. Sorry, you derive from sockets HTTP handler connection factory. You override those, whichever
Virtuals,
3 methods you need, and then you instantiate that and you assign it.
Yeah, that feels like it makes more sense to me.
It also makes some of the common cases more code, but sure, it's an alternative.
Yeah, I guess my question is more like for these extension methods we're looking at right now on sockets, like it seems what you were saying is that some of them are specific to sockets because they fish out particular things that are only applicable if you go over sockets that have nothing to do with another implementation of ConnectionFactory, right? So in that case, they make sense to be here. But if some of them are just accelerators to avoid writing the very first method call, which gives you the ConnectionFactory specific to sockets, then that might explode badly, right? Because it means now every single time we have one more thing, you just keep to add it in two places, right? That's the kind of thing I try to avoid.
You're saying if we wanted to expose another delegate in the future, essentially, in one approach we would add a virtual, in the other approach we'd have to add two methods here. Well,
or depending on how many other types like socket HTTP handler we end up having in the BCL, right? Because that's a bit.
Instead of a method, we would have new types.
Yeah, sorry. Anything we do here is going to be specific to socket HTTP handler. If for no other reason, then it needs to take things that are specific to HTTP client, like the HTTP request message.
Gotcha. So that if that's the case, then I have no objections. Like it looked to me as if these methods are just accelerators over things that we basically cut earlier. If that's not the case, then I have no problems with that.
Yeah, and
I have no problem with the class, like exposing a socket HTTP handler ConnectionFactory with multiple virtuals on it. It means the use of those is a little bit more code because you have to create your own class, override the methods, and then instantiate the class. But maybe it's a little bit more future-proof.
Yeah, and the to argue, against that, just to make sure we're designing what we want to, if the purpose here is you would end up with 3 virtuals, but really the best answer is you only override any one of them, then maybe there are 3 different things that you get to write the one method that you do, and we figure out how to compose it correctly for you. But yes, it'll have the problem of, oh, we figured out there's another thing we want to pass. I mean, theoretically, the ConnectionProperties, untyped grab bag of stuff is the way out of that.
The common case will be to override 1. I think probably the 90% case is to override 1. I think there's probably a 10% case where maybe you would override 2, because if, for example, you were overriding the kind of the one to create the connection, like the returns a stream, and you wanted to delegate to what the base implementation did for that, and then like wrap it in some way, that base implementation would end up using the virtual that created the socket. So maybe you would configure the socket, and then you would also wrap the connection that was returned from the base. I'm having trouble coming up with any situation where you would override all 3.
Yeah.
Right.
So it may be, like, this may be right. I'm just making sure that we're happy with complicated fallback models.
I'm totally happy. I'm happy with the top 4, but the top 4 require the next 2, and I don't love the next 2, the default ones, because those are basically the exposing of the base methods.
Yeah.
Yep.
And as to understand how someone uses these, assume we're on HTTP 1.1, and there's this thing called HTTP that doesn't have an S on the end. Is all of the default port routing and all that stuff already done, and the DNS endpoint already has the right port, or is somebody responsible for inspecting the scheme off the URI of the message and doing all the routing themselves? In the general case.
The DNS endpoint here will be whatever host you're connecting to. So it might be what's in the URL. It might be a proxy. It is like establishing TLS is done by the socket's HTTP handler. So the user wouldn't have to worry about that here.
I'm just trying to figure out how much work is somebody supposed to, like, you're passing a bunch of things. Is it because they need to do all of them, or is it because some people want to like write down one thing from the request message and then do the default? Some people want to write down the endpoint and do the default. Some people want to filter the endpoint.
Yeah. So the DNS endpoint you'd probably always use unless you were maybe doing like an in-memory transport. The request message here is there because well, you might want the URL, but it's really only the first URL on the connection, so it's not super useful. Better is the properties/options grab bag on their request message, so the user could create a request with something and then read it in here if they wanted to.
I think the short answer to your question, Jeremy, is the port in the DNS endpoint is the one that you should be connecting to.
Okay.
The longer answer is there are certain places where, like for the overload below the one that's highlighted that returns a stream or a connection, right? You might not be going over TCP at all. You might be going over named pipes. You might be going over Unix domain sockets, whatever, at which point you're going to need to reinterpret the data in the request message and the endpoint however you see fit to reinterpret that to mean, oh, the URL was actually a UDS : / scheme. Okay, that means I'm going to create a domain socket.
Yep.
Okay.
So Stephen, you said you don't like the next two. What's wrong with them?
I don't. Well, it's not that I don't like them, but it's a necessary evil because let's say you're doing the let's say we're doing the virtual approach. So we had a sockets HTTP handler, ConnectionFactory, concrete type, and it had 3 virtual methods: one that returned a socket, one that returned a stream, and one that returned an iConnection. And you override the right one to get the behavior you want. All of those are virtual because the base implementations provide kind of the functionality for those that sockets HTTP handler does today.
Right.
In this scheme, we don't have the ability to have a base implementation. So these we're basically creating a new pattern here where these quote, default methods are the base implementation. And if you wanted to do the equivalent of calling to base, you instead call sockets HTTP handler .default create socket or default establish connection. And that's as if you were calling base. So we're inventing a new pattern that I haven't really seen used anywhere. And in that regard, it feels a little icky.
Yeah.
Isn't that logically like in other cases I've seen when you use delegates for that, you basically pass in the next handler and then you can effectively treat it like a base call, right?
Right. So that works well if you have a delegate type, not with funcs, because it would make this thing insane. All right.
Why?
Yeah, imagine.
Because you would have func of HTTP request messages to the endpoint to the properties, and then you'd have it take in a nested func of the same signature that was basically next, and it would basically span across the screen.
Yeah.
Fit.
The signature gets not great. That's true. Type. But that seems fine anyway. Like I mean, as I said earlier, like my threshold is usually around 3 arguments, and then I'm like, we probably want to have it custom type for that anyway.
Two arguments.
Yeah. Well, I think Stephen makes a good call out though. Like if we had a factory class for sockets HTTP handler, these would just be default virtual implementations.
Right. I mean, what do you do in ASP.NET middleware? Do you actually have the next handler, or do you have something like a static default?
Next.
Yeah.
We have a delegate.
Yeah, we
type to make it a little.
We pass you in next, basically. Yeah. I do wonder. So question: if you have the base class and you don't use it, and somebody sets their own factory, it still works, right?
Yep.
Yes.
You don't have to use the HTTP blah base class. That's just a helper.
Right.
Just a helper.
Okay.
I think I've talked myself, even though I argued with you, Corey, and pushed you towards adding the static methods. I think I've argued myself into we should maybe put it back into just the virtuals.
Yeah, I think that's where I went from obviously we want a class to sometimes it's hard to understand what you're supposed to override and how the different virtuals interact, and so maybe this is cleaner to why don't we just make a concrete type with virtuals?
I mean, the thing I don't like is it's to do anything meaningful with it, to do anything, if you're going to use that class, the only reason you'd use it really is to derive from it and override. So we've made something that really is a 1-liner into like a 10-liner. including
Yeah.
creating a custom type. But
Yeah.
maybe
There-
that's not terrible.
But maybe
There
like
is
the
one super common use case though, the one where you basically just change the stream,
Yeah.
where you change the transport, is pretty common.
Well, I think even more common is the one where you just want to tweak the socket.
I see. Yeah, you're right.
But I mean, I think in that case, why don't we have just an extension method that literally just does that?
Well, that's
Set.
what these create connection factory methods are.
Well, but do you need the whole ceremony for that, or couldn't you just have one that takes, it's almost an extension method overnight connection factory that, passes you the socket or something, and then you do something with it?
Well, when
You wanted to change it before the socket got opened.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I see. You want to. I see. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, on the new
Yeah.
sockets HTTP connection factory extends connection factory. It could certainly then add you could have a static or a constructor that takes, that same func for doing a one small tweak thing, but this would make other things simpler, I think.
So this new class would basically look like this.
you wouldn't have a virtual for the one that returns a stream.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we could. That's essentially just a specialization of the second method here.
Yeah, but it's so common. I would have that one too.
Yeah, but we can't overload based on return type. Oh, it would take
Yeah.
it would take it. Wait, does this take an iConnection? It doesn't, does it?
The ones that return streams
No.
typically have been taking iConnections to this point, right?
Wait, what?
Well,
So the
no, the
callbacks that
original
return-
ones did not take a connection.
Because the other
So-
filters we've been looking at that like return a value task as stream have been taking iConnection as an argument, right?
Yeah,
those,
but
those are the filter ones.
Okay.
Yeah, so these three methods would still live on socket's HTTP handler.
Right.
Although maybe these could live on the other connection factory too. I'm not sure.
No, I think they should live there.
Probably. We would be moving all of these methods, and these ones here are the ones that return to stream. These are not filtering methods. These are return me the network stream.
Right. This is like the dialers,
Yeah.
kind of.
So this is a dialer that bypasses all of the connection base class stuff.
Yeah. So I think that we would usually have three virtuals, and we couldn't overload because just on return type. So it would need to be like established connection and established stream or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but which
Which one do you call?
yeah.
Yes.
Right. So it's assuming that it's easy enough to create a connection from a stream where it will then just return a thing that has the pipe-based writer over a stream and the stream, then maybe you just want established connection and it's, two more lines of code for somebody doing a stream.
Do we have a helper for that, Corey?
We don't. We had at one point. It's gone now.
How do we feel about like virtual methods calling other virtual methods?
I mean,
We-
that's
that-
what this
that-
would do here. This
Okay.
established connection would call create socket.
I see. So if you override both and you don't call like create socket yourself, then that's just not getting called.
Yeah,
Let's say
like
you
from established
call
connection.
base from established connection, you'd call base established connection. It would in turn call the virtual create socket.
Right. Fair.
Yeah, I can't think of a clean way here to let people just return a stream.
I think we would need some helper that went from a stream to a connection.
Yeah.
Or the default of established connection calls established stream, and established stream calls create socket, and that's the pipeline, and you document that, and people just insert themselves wherever they want.
Well, we have this connection class. We can add a static method on this, like connection.fromStream from pipe.
The problem is, wouldn't you lose any properties or whatever if you did it that way? Like if you went straight from stream to connection, just using like a static method.
Well, yeah, you wouldn't have any properties. So if you did that, maybe sockets handler could be slightly less efficient if it didn't have access to the socket through a property or something.
Presumably,
Connection.FromStream could take the stream as a required parameter and then take all the things that connection base needed as optional parameters or nullable parameters.
I mean, presumably, if you're constructing a connection, you need to give it everything that exists there. So the stream or the pipe, the connection properties, and the optional endpoints.
Yeah, presumably connection base, now that we've scrolled back up and are looking at it again, has a protected constructor that takes those 3 values. Because right now you can't build one.
Yeah, possibly. I'm not sure if these should be, concrete or virtual here. I think we can get away with not having them be virtual, just using a protected constructor.
I mean, if you need them to be delay computed, then I guess virtual. But I think we sort of skipped that part and just said turn the class or interface into a class.
Possibly.
I think make it virtual, so it can be delay implemented.
No, it's a very good point, especially for things like local and remote endpoint. Like
we don't know allocations.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we don't want to be greedy with stuff like that.
Sure. We're also missing some methods here, some protected virtuals to create the stream and the pipe. So what do we think of having a connection.FromStream and FromPipe?
That would take all of those other arguments as well?
Yeah, I guess so.
Which ones?
The stream of the pipe, the connection properties, the local and remote endpoints.
Yeah, so you would have 2 overloads of it. One takes the stream, one takes the pipe, and each overload would take properties and endpoints.
Yeah, it's not the only way to create a connection. It's just an accelerator for if you're just trying to fit your rectangular pegs into a round hole.
So I like that.
It's like even if we had that established stream virtual method, the common scenario that David was referring to is going to require a non-trivial amount of code unless there's a way to create an connection from the stream, the connection properties, the endpoints.
Yeah. Also, keep in mind the properties thing wasn't even solved in the original proposal. Like here on the handler, if you call these 2 helper methods that just return a stream, you don't get to set any properties on that. It just returns with no properties.
Okay, I like the from stream and from pipe. What was it? From stream and from pipe factory methods on connection. No, that actually sounds pretty good. Would those properties be optional, like the connection properties?
I think everything except for the stream or pipe would be optional.
Yeah,
then that sounds super good.
And when we say optional here, do we mean default?
I would just say nullable.
Nullable,
Okay.
yeah.
So force people to type them out?
Do they really need to be nullable?
Yeah.
Well, they have to
Can
be
we just
nullable
have like empty property bag that's default or something? Like empty connection property?
I see.
Maybe they could default to null. I don't really care anymore.
I was just clarifying what we meant when we said optional, because it means 2 different things.
Yeah, no, you're right.
So the question is like, all right, so if we pass the null for iConnection properties, would the resulting connection have a null? No, I mean, it's not nullable, right? It would be like an empty one.
And have an empty.
Right.
So
Yeah, okay.
This is what I'm imagining here.
And presumably the same for pipe.
Yeah.
Are we in agreement that these properties are going to be virtual? So it sounded like we were in agreement for the endpoints at least, but like, what about stream and pipe?
These won't be virtual. We need to have I believe this is what we landed on last time we talked.
No, what?
Yeah, because stream will call create pipe and wrap it in a stream, and pipe will call create stream and wrap it in a pipe. So you only have to override one of the 2.
Well,
yeah, and we want to make it so if you start using pipe and you try to use stream, it throws. So this is a safe way for us to only call one of them.
I mean, okay, can we delegate the throwing to like a default implementation or something? Does it always have to throw, or does it have to throw in like some cases?
I mean, it would. The only time it would throw is if you were doing something very wrong. So
okay, good.
I think all cases it would throw.
Why are the virtual methods better than the virtual getter?
So the virtual methods mean that we in addition to providing the default call the other one implementation, we get to control once you've called one of these, you can't call the other. It throws, and that is true for all connections, no matter what. That is part of the connection contract now.
I am not sure about that. So that part I'm not sure about yet.
Couldn't that just be the default of the virtual implementation, of the virtual getter, and then if someone chooses to override that?
Now it's really hard to override. You need to understand if they've called the base member and use the base field that you don't have access to in order to know if they've called the other one. Like, we would need to make all the state public.
I'm not convinced about the throwing behavior yet.
Well, can you think of a situation where you are using a pipe and suddenly you want to write to that pipe through a stream?
Yeah.
But you want to use both at the same time. Like buffering from using a network stream will totally clash with using, the pipe's own buffering.
No, so think about the scenario where you have a pipeline of middleware, where the first one is going to read a pipe and the second one is going to wrap the stream and carry on. And as long as you don't like leave buffer in the pipe that isn't in the stream to read already, it all works fine, right?
That's the problem though.
But
so like alternating between stream, pipe, and middleware will work fine. Like reading from like the same stream using stream and pipe, like the pipe buffers for you, right? Like you don't control like basically what the default pipe is basically going to sip out of the
all I'm trying to
stream.
Understand is if I have that scenario where I have things that alternate between pipe and stream in the same pipeline, would that break by default? No.
Yes.
That can't be that. That's
so depend on what you mean by alternate. Sorry, if it's like adding throttling to encryption, that's fine. Well, I mean, I guess those the throttling doesn't necessarily use the stream. But if you're layering transformations, that's one thing. If you're like a parser that's taking a connection and then using the stream for one frame and then a pipe for the next frame of the data, then that's not going to work.
Think of it as different components. I know that if you interleave in the same component, it is weird and bizarre. I'm talking about two different things, that one thing that was written for streams and one thing that was written for pipes. And the first thing understands that the next thing is written for streams and it uses pipes, and it makes sure that the connection is in the right state so that it is going to pass the right state onward to the next component without having the weird behavior.
I think what would happen is you would call connection.pipe at like the bottom of the composition, and then that would use pipe all the way through as its or not. I mean, the implementation could choose to use stream for the next layer and so on. But
if we wanted to make, so here's a concrete scenario. Let's say I have the SSL stream factory in the pipeline, and before that I read the first 5 bytes to parse the SNI. Could I parse those 5 bytes with a pipe and then call into the thing that they use a stream, or is that going to blow up?
So regardless of, hold on. The throwing behavior is there to protect against data corruption behavior, right?
Yep,
so
got it.
The only way we could make that scenario work is if we made it such that a custom pipe and a custom stream were used in a way that entirely coordinated all of their efforts, didn't do any buffering that the other one didn't also have access to.
Yeah. Exactly.
And if the user is providing one of those things, then because the other thing isn't privy to whatever buffering it's using, we would always have to wrap. If someone gave us a pipe, we'd have to wrap it. If someone gave us a stream, we'd have to wrap it, because then we would control sort of the siblings, the stream and the pipe siblings, and their own buffering on top of that arbitrary underlying data source.
Right.
So right now,
the default would make all cases more expensive.
if someone sets a stream, right, and then we use the default stream to pipe wrapper that exists in the BCL today, like that stream to pipe wrapper has its own internal buffers.
Right.
So like that's not going to work.
That would work as long as they only use the pipe. But if they then tried to use both,
right. If someone sets the pipe and you get a stream wrapper, you're all fine, and it always works. Right.
Yep.
The problem is if you try and use both. And so if we wanted to enable to use both, we couldn't give you raw access to the one that the developer created. We'd have to expose our own wrapper. Like if they gave us a stream, we'd have to wrap that stream in our own stream that coordinated with the pipe.
Right. So can it throw one way but not the other?
I don't understand.
If I give it a pipe and the stream is exposed, can that not throw? Because the stream is just copying from the actual pipe data?
You're saying the stream that wraps the pipe
always
goes to the pipe for everything and such, doesn't have any of its own buffering?
Right.
That's not
always true, obviously, because like some streams buffer, but
I feel like that scenario is so complicated that we might be the only ones crazy enough to try it, and we would be asking every other implementer of this API to implement that madness. It seems safer to me to just be like, you're always using a stream or you're always using a pipe. Switching back and forth is crazy talk.
I think it sounds easy to say that at a high level. I just don't think it's I think the reality is people will author components picking one thing and will plug it into a pipeline and then the whole thing will break. That is just not.
I don't think we can
not
reasonably
usable.
make one direction work and the other one not. I think we'd have to make them both always work.
So David, take your concrete example of inspecting the TLS handshake. In that scenario, to make sure it works no matter how the connection is wrapped, whether it's a default pipe stream wrapper or vice versa, in that case you would want to wrap as the TLS handshake inspector. So you would take a look at the first few bytes using the pipe or whatever, and then you just wrap the connection, and you want to start from the beginning anyway. So yes, it would be easy if you could just like examine the bytes using the pipe and then not consume it, but it's not that hard to just wrap it again.
So I would wrap to do what exactly?
So in that case, you would basically just reset the pipe. So since it's a new connection type, it won't know that you've accessed the pipe, right? So if someone tries to access the stream next, you're fine because you created a new connection.
Okay, so middleware that reads the data should wrap just to reset the state.
Yeah,
if that works.
Yeah, I think so. Like, because you want people to be able to use either property, stream or pipe.
So that sounds like a thing that everyone has to do then. So like, if you are authoring a piece of thing, a component that runs in a middleware chain, then you should wrap it if you touch the stream before passing it on, because you don't know that someone is going to read the pipe for the stream, and therefore like it may malfunction. All right.
Same for writing too, right? Because I think either access would end up invalidating the other. Though for writing, it doesn't need to be that way. It's just more consistent, I guess.
Writing is a bit easier just because there's normally one owner. You don't normally like. I guess no, actually that's not true. It's the same thing.
Just want to call out we're out of time.
Yeah.
What?
So if we're doing the throwing, which I do like to prevent data corruption, unless there's an attribute we can put that tells the debugger not to auto expand properties, we probably want to move them to methods so you don't Heisenbug kill your process.
There is an attribute we can tell the debugger to not auto expand properties.
Okay. Then we definitely want to put that on there so that you don't step into a thing, it evaluates P before S, and now your method crashes with you can't talk about the stream.
Yep. All right. Are we okay with this from stream from pipe here?
API is great, but the throwing behavior I think is still busted. I need to think through it first, but yeah, the
Sure.
API seemed good.
And do we like having this separate connection factory class here
Ship
rather
it.
than all the static stuff?
I give up going back and forth. Let's just ship it.
Okay.
I think the class is more .NET-y, and once we can figure out the internal logistics of it, which the from stream probably solves, then it should be good.
No, it's more object oriented.
All right, I've got to head to another meeting. See you guys.
Thanks, Corey.
Do we need one more iteration then, or is that it?
That's not it.
One more.
All
All
right.
right. So where do we start off the next meeting? Are we going to be talking more about the poisoning?
I think the concrete implementations, I guess, at that point.
Yeah.
And the poisoning.
So the problem is the next meeting will be not this week. It will be next week, because this week is already booked again. Any preferences? Otherwise, I would probably do it for Thursday.
8 a.m.
Well, they're all AM. They're all 10 to 12. So that's
7
sorry. What?
Eastern time.
7
At
Eastern.
this point. Wait,
Book it.
are we still live?
We're still live. Like so. That but the question is like, so when should I set it up? Thursday then?
As soon as possible.
Okay, then Thursday it is.
Thursday next
Thursday,
week.
7 a.m. Eastern.
Yep, Eastern time. No, could you imagine?
Sounds fine. I'll be up.
You'd lose your productivity hour, Steve.
That's okay.
Well, 7 a.m. Eastern time. What is that? 4 a.m. here? No way.
4 a.m.
Yo.
No, I'm not
Sounds
doing
fine.
this.
Sounds good to me.
All right, then I see you guys next week.
Thank you.
Bye bye.